Well, welcome to this video, and I hope you like it. If you do, click the like button, hit subscribe, and share with a friend. Okay, I'm finally getting back to the GMO crops that I've been doing a short series on. I wanted to do a video basically on the claim of GMO crops being environmentally friendly, which is sometimes made. I decided to split that up though, because there are mainly, at least, two very different claims. And as I dig along, I might even split off a third for any other little miscellaneous claims like saving water or whatever. But mainly we have two predominant groups among the GMO crops. Those are crops that are made to resist a pest, normally an insect pest, and there are crops that are designed to be immune to herbicide, and both of these have a very different claim of being environmentally friendly because they mitigate some other impact of what we now call conventional farming, which is it's a really goofy thing in and of itself. Somehow industrialized farming using machinery and very intensive practices, and also using a lot of chemicals, has become thought of as being conventional, though from the dawn of time until basically, the early to mid 20th century, the only farming done was what we would call today organic, although organic farming today is a little different than it was in the past. And it's really kind of weird because I was exposed to organic farming by people who were ancient when I was a kid, who just, that's the way they learned. They were the older generation that grew up, back in the Depression or before the Depression. And, they used manure and compost piles and compost tea and things like that. They never really thought of things in the terms we do today. That's just the way they did it before all these chemicals were marketed to farmers and then later to home gardeners. So it's kind of weird. And a lot of the environmental benefits that are claimed by the GMO seed industry are in comparison to our modern industrialized heavy chemical use way of doing things. Now, the supposed benefit from GMO crops that are herbicide resistant is prevention of erosion. Trying to present this in some sort of an order so don't get too confusing. As time went on, mankind has slowly gotten bigger in the individual farms. It no longer was just somebody raising food for their family and, having a little bit left over to sell in the market. A lot of economies originally were mostly a barter economy. People weren't that worried about making money. They had a plot of land. They tried to be pretty much self-efficient, and they just traded a lot of things with neighbors and such to make do, and they got a little bit of money from any surplus and used that money to buy the things they could not make themselves. People were a lot more self-sufficient. We have a totally different economy now, where our farms, instead of trying to feed the farmer and his family and have a little bit left over, they've turned into much larger estates. Although it's a whole other subject. Actually, if you look statistically, the majority of farms in the United States are small and more or less what most people would consider hobby farms, because they generate less than $100,000 gross, and they're, you know, only a couple of acres. And, you know, usually the person doing it, their main source of income is something other than the farm. Or even if the farm is their main source of income, they're still doing something else on the side to supplement that income. So sometimes it distorts the numbers. You know, the guy who works in a factory and, you know, has a couple acres of corn kind of outnumbers the people that actually make a living off of raising corn, for an example here. But at any rate, as we got more industrialized and our farms started to be bigger, and, you know, the ratio of farmers compared to people doing other occupations shifted, these farms got huge. And, you know, that was around the time of the Industrial Revolution. And, you know, people were getting into, you know, more of our modern plowing techniques, and that, even though they were using horses at first at that time, that, you know, a lot more acreage, a lot more land being planted, and you're starting to see people specialize in single crops instead of people trying to sustain a family and have a variety of vegetables or whatever. There's people who farm, you know, just corn, or they just raise cattle, they just do this, or they just do that. That's a fairly modern specialization. And with these farming techniques, although erosion and soil loss, you know, did exist farther back in time, it's slowly been getting aggravated. And maybe I should stop here and just explain what erosion is. It's losing soil to either wind or water. Where it's flat, there's a lot more wind erosion problems than there are where it's hilly, just because it's windier and there's less barriers, and the water tends not to run as fast. You know, it tends to pond and puddle a lot more than, say, here in Pennsylvania, where the majority of the state is very hilly and often has slopes that are quite steep. That's part of the reason why everybody abandoned their farms in Pennsylvania and moved west in the late 1800s, is because a lot of these farms, you know, these people were plowing the fields and the soil was all washing away, and, you know, after a decade or so, the soil wasn't any good for much anymore, because, you know, all those thousands of years of dead leaves that were building up and putting organic matter into the soil, they all washed down the river and into the sea. So there's two types of erosion. Water erosion, especially around here, is more of an issue. I'd say in a more arid place, it starts to shift a little bit more towards wind. But a lot of the ways that you try to prevent this erosion are the same. And, you know, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on the effects of erosion on the environment, because it affects, you know, fish, it affects the navigability of rivers. It's a big rabbit hole to go down, and that's part of the reason why I split this video, because I've got to at least touch on explaining each thing, what the damage is. So erosion, it's clogging up the you know, the local waterways with dirt, basically. You know, it affects fish, it affects other wildlife going on downstream all the way to the ocean. Erosion in the Susquehanna River affects the Chesapeake Bay. The other thing is that the land itself is actually becoming less fertile. The part of the soil that is considered topsoil, the stuff that has organic matter and more nutrients in it, is being washed away, and the heavier material is being left behind. And that heavier material is usually coarser, has less nutrients in it, and that's part of the reason why it's bad for the farm itself, and that's why a lot of times land, quote unquote, wears out. It's washing away faster than it's being replenished by other organic material and just the slow decomposition of the minerals in the soil. Because soil basically starts out mostly as bedrock and then slowly breaks down into the, gravel and sand and silt and clay, etc., and mixes with some organic matter and becomes what we think of as topsoil. So now that we have at least a little understanding of what's bad about it, there are many ways that you can try to mitigate it. And modern westernized farming is the worst. One of the things is what they call a fallow field. Giving a field a rest, and basically you take a plow and plow under the old crop after it's been harvested, say corn stalks or whatever. You plow it under and you just leave it, because it leaves a lot of bare soil. Sometimes it sprouts weeds, but a lot of it's bare. Nothing is purposefully planted on it. And of course, bare soil washes away a lot easier than vegetated soil. The roots tend to hold things there. Also, the fact that you went through it with a plow, you kind of fluffed it up a little bit and made it a little bit more broke up, less compacted, and it makes it also a little bit easier for wind or water to carry some of that soil away. So one of the ways to mitigate that is planting, say, a cover crop. Sometimes they plant soybeans and then later plow them under, because soybeans are a legume. Any kind of bean or pea or clover, they tend to have the ability to form a relationship with certain fungi and bacteria, and they fix nitrogen. So it puts nitrogen back into the soil. So they're often, a preferred cover crop, because, just growing anything there kind of holds the soil. But if you use something in the legume family, you get that added benefit of putting a little bit more nitrogen back into the soil. Crops can also be rotated. Instead of just, you plant corn or whatever, after the corn's done, you plant something else, so the soil spends a lot less time just being open and bare. And certain things being planted in rotation after the other are better than others. There's actually one of the links I put in here actually has a little breakdown of which crop rotation cycles are better. And that's kind of you can tweak that to your own how would I say, benefit, I guess, your own needs. Another thing is just what they call crop residue. Basically, say you grew corn this year, okay, you just leave the corn stalks there, and those dead stalks will help hold the soil over winter until you plant again. So leaving the old plant material in place helps hold the soil. There's also something called intercropping, which is basically you plant a strip of corn, then you plant a strip of something else, and then you plant another strip of corn or whatever, so that as a whole, there's always something growing, because you've got different crops that are being planted and harvested at different times. So the strips that are being harvested and left open are somewhat protected by the strips that are not. And there's a million variations on this. And there's also some other simple things. They talk about planting, if you have an area where the water collects, just keeping it mowed grass, because at least where that water concentrates and wants to go downhill, that concentrated point at least has something holding the soil. There's also contour planting. And, you know, this goes back to the more westernized version of farming. We tend to make things into squares. And then we tend to plant things in these straight rows in the squares. And if, you know, the land's kind of undulating, water's going to want to run down those rows to a low spot and then kick out. And the worst way to do it would actually be to plant on a hillside where you've got the rows running up and down the hill. You're better with them going across the hill because it kind of slows down the water. And contour planting is actually, instead of being square with the property lines, you make your rows kind of follow like a contour line would be in elevation. Being that, say, you start a row and it's at 975 feet in elevation, you want every point along that row to be roughly 975 feet in elevation. So you're kind of following the way that the land is formed and contoured. So, you know, you might have a square piece of property, but your actual rows would be going in a curve following the way the land is sloped. So, or actually I should say the rows should be perpendicular to the slope. Like if you run a line going from uphill to downhill, you would be making a T, crossing it. And another thing for wind erosion that's especially done in the prairie states is windbreaks, just planting a row of trees to slow down the wind and protect things down closer to the ground, making, you know, the higher speed winds at least kind of go higher than the trees. They usually plant something, just a single row of something that's really thick and dense, something, think like red cedar or something like that. People plant a lot of other things, but that's just an example. And kind of going back to the idea of not disturbing the soil, one of the methods that people do now is it's called no-till. There's also some other more sort of limited till. There's, I think it's strip tilling and ridge tilling. There's all kinds of different variations of this that are minimizing what is actually dug up in order to plant a crop. But no-till involves just, instead of plowing the field, you go along and you got like a little, they call it a seed drill, a little thing that just makes a little hole and plants an individual seed every so often as you go along. And it doesn't disturb the rest of the soil. So you're just, you know, going along and planting individual seeds. Now, where the GMO crops finally come into this is in order to do this no-till without, you know, without having to, you know, compete with a lot of weeds or whatever, they just basically carpet bomb the field with, say, Roundup, and then, you know, it kills everything else, only these seeds will grow. Seed works fine. That's not the only way of doing no-till. It's one of the most popular ones at this point in history, though. And that's where they're saying that they are helping prevent erosion, because no-till has, you know, less erosion, a lot less erosion than the traditional plow up the field, let it sit fallow, then over winter, and then come back and plant in spring. You're not leaving this bare soil to wash away. So that's why it is there. Like I said, they make it, often the GMO industry makes it sound like that's the only way to do no-till. It might be a more convenient way, But then again, the herbicide itself has its own detrimental effects on other plants, biodiversity, potentially humans. Roundup is not the most dangerous of herbicides, although it has been, it's been able to be proven in a court of law that it is it's at least potentially a carcinogen, and due to the court cases that no matter how much they can spend on lawyers, they just can't seem to overturn, where Monsanto and then their Bayer, which bought Monsanto, just couldn't, overturn those rulings in their favor. Scientists, that do research on this, the research points to Roundup is a probable carcinogen. You've got to look at this in light of a lot of other things. Cigarette smoking, alcohol, a lot of things are carcinogens. Some things are carcinogens whenever there's chronic exposure, but negligible when it's a one-time thing. And things are all over the map, and a lot of this stuff is still being sorted out, but it does seem like people who work with it a lot do run a significant cancer risk. That's what everything seems to show right now. Most pesticides, whether they kill plants, rats, insects, whatever, are not good for you. Most of them work on basically a micro level. They work with your cellular metabolism, and some of these have unforeseen effects. A lot of them do tend to mutate the DNA of whatever they come in contact with too, and you get enough stuff messing up your DNA, sooner or later some of those cells survive and form a cancerous growth. That's just the way nature tends to work. So you got to think about it like that. Cancer's a vast subject in and of itself. There are naturally occurring things that cause cancer. Sunlight causes cancer. So, how do I say, it's what they're preventing, they actually are to some extent mitigating the the erosion of the soil. Although bare soil with all the weeds killed probably erodes faster than something like planting a cover crop. Say, if you're going to grow something that grows tall like corn, you can plant something like white clover, or they call it Dutch clover, which would be a nitrogen fixing crop. It's low growing. If you plant something that grows tall like corn, the corn's going to grow right through it. There are people that are experimenting with other ways of doing this. There's basically things that act like mulch. There's a lot of other technologies for no-till. There's a lot more systems than just carpet bomb stuff with Roundup and plant Roundup ready crops. So this is sort of a truth, but a truth that when fully explained is less of a big deal, because like I said, there are other methods of doing no-till that do not use GMO crops or herbicides. It's just the most common way at the moment is the use of herbicides and GMO crops to do no-till farming. So no-till farming is beneficial. The GMO crops come with a downside that some of the other methods don't have, although they may be more economically profitable to the farmer to use the GMO crop and the herbicide. things may change. There's one of the things I'll get into more farther down with the environmental impacts themselves is just, we've already had instances in the United States where some of these herbicides have been so overused that they are creating resistance in some of these weeds. So now, instead of only using an herbicide when you do have a problem, if you're using it preventatively, we're having the same problem that we have with the overuse of antibiotics, creating antibiotic resistant strains of different diseases. There was a thing that came out of a few years back about hogweed, which is one of the things that, screws up farm equipment if it's growing in something you're trying to harvest mechanically, has developed a resistance to the Roundup herbicide and is causing problems in some areas. So you've got to look at that, and hopefully at least this explains what the argument is in a little bit more detail. I've got some links below. You can do a little bit deeper dive. I don't want this to be a 2-hour-long video. I'm trying to keep them in the 15-20 minute range as much as I can here, so it's only iced tea. But hopefully that helps you understand a little bit more what that argument is all about. So, guess I'll see you on the next one. I think I've gone through all my little punch list items here, and I plan to do the one about the reduction in pesticides next time. So that's the other half of this environmental benefit that is claimed by GMO crops. So hopefully this going through it, like I said, there is a benefit. There are other methods to achieve the same benefit that do not have the same environmental downside that the herbicide has, but financially the scale might be tipped in favor of the herbicide and the GMO crop at this point in time if you're going to do the no-till planting. So I'll see you on the next one. Well, I hope you found that video informative. Hopefully it made you think, and please click the like button and subscribe if you haven't done that already, and check out the video that should be appearing somewhere around me here, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thanks.